A warm welcome to you and thank you for joining us today for our session, Considering the Transition to Long-Term Care. So this presentation is for caregivers who are thinking about arranging a move into long-term care. Right from the outset though, I do want to highlight a couple of important things. Firstly, the information we provide today reflects policies as they are outlined by the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health holds the overall responsibility for health services in BC and outlines what these services will look like through provincial legislation. Our 5 regional health authorities, so Fraser Health, Vancouver Coastal, etc., are then responsible for delivering those health services across the province according to this legislation. It's important to note that some policies from the Ministry of Health may be interpreted differently between health authorities and case managers. So we always recommend and encourage you to speak with your case manager first should you have any questions about the healthcare services available in your region. And then secondly, we fully acknowledge that COVID has added a whole other dimension to what is often already a very challenging process families face when attempting to navigate the various long-term care options. So today in this presentation, we will talk about what the options are for long-term care in BC. We'll review the eligibility for publicly subsidized care and the costs of public and private care. We will review the process of arranging for long-term care and also provide some examples of questions to consider when looking for a care home. And we're also going to share some suggestions on ways to ease the transition. So let us dive right in by looking at what exactly are the options available to us in BC for long-term care. So in BC, there are several different types of care where people with dementia may live. Some people may be able to remain in their homes in the community with increasing home care and home support. However, though, for others, the need for a greater level of care or a different environment may require them to move to another housing model, such as assisted living or long-term care. Assisted living is a middle option and it falls in between home care and long-term care for individuals who require assistance with some personal care and hospitality services, but they're still able to make decisions on their own behalf. So I'll come back to what this means exactly in the next slide. But this essentially looks like a private apartment with weekly housekeeping, lunch and dinner, and they provide social and recreational activities, and some personal care services may be provided. While most people living with dementia will unfortunately move into a long-term care after home care options have been exhausted, some in the early stages of dementia may move into assisted living, which we will talk about more shortly. Long-term care then is a higher level of care for those who no longer have the capacity to live independently or semi-independently in the community. So most often when we talk about the transition to care, we are referring to move into this level of care for a person living with dementia. The Ministry of Health regulates assisted living and long-term care, and all public and private homes must have a valid license in order to operate. Our role at the Alzheimer's Society of BC is to provide general information about these options and factors to consider when choosing the right home for the person you're supporting. But the Alzheimer's Society of BC does not recommend any specific care home. So let's take a closer look at assisted living. Assisted living is a semi-independent form of housing. It's available through publicly subsidized and private pay operators. In the assisted living model, tenants have their own apartment and they can come and go as they please. Now with COVID, however, there may still be some restrictions in place depending on the residence. Some people living with dementia may live in assisted living in the early stage, but as we mentioned previously, they will usually need to move into long-term care as their care needs progress and their decision-making capacity becomes more impaired. To live in assisted living, the person with dementia must be able to make decisions on their own behalf. So I'll give you an example. So they need to be able to direct their own care with the care team. For instance, if a fire alarm were to go off, would the person be able to respond appropriately? If they ended up falling, getting out of bed and falling during the night, would they know how to push the panic button that's around their neck? So the ability to direct one's own care and make their own decisions is a requirement of the Home and Community Care Act in BC. We also know that how this policy is interpreted can certainly vary between public and private residences. Private assisted living will offer various services and options, different assessments and moving criteria, and often a sliding scale of support and costs. Each residence needs to be considered and researched individually. Some private residences may offer additional care services for a fee, or residents may top up their service by also accessing subsidized home care, so allowing them to stay in assisted living longer. So what that really means is you may be in a private assisted living environment facility, but you can also possibly access subsidized home care. Then keep in mind that in private assisted living, the decision of who is appropriate for the residence is made by the director of care or administrator. For publicly subsidized assisted living, it's a case manager who is responsible for assessing if assisted living is the right option for a person. So let us take a look at what services are provided in assisted living. According to the Home and Community Care Act, which outlines the requirements of assisted living operators in BC, there are certain services that must be provided in both private and publicly subsidized assisted living in order for operators to be licensed. And these include 2 meals per day, and some residences will also include a continental breakfast and snacks throughout the day. Social and recreational activity programs are a huge part of assisted living, such as music activities, bus trips, exercise, word games, etc. Hospitality services, which include weekly housekeeping and laundering of towels and linens. Laundry equipment is available for tenants to do their personal laundry, and some places offer personal laundry services for an additional cost. Then personal care services. These may include assistance with grooming, dressing, bathing, mobility, or other tasks designated by a healthcare professional. And then a 24-hour emergency response system. Let's take a look at the cost of assisted living. So it's 70% of the person's after-tax income, with a minimum rate of $1,060.30 per month for an individual, or $1,615 per month for a couple, and that's for the year 2021, the year that we're in now. For maximum rates, you do need to contact your case manager, as they will vary depending on the housing market conditions where you live and the cost of the personal care services being received. The cost for private assisted living will also vary. So we're going to move on to long-term care. We'll take a closer look at this. So long-term care homes, also sometimes referred to as residential care or nursing home care, are a secure environment for people whose care needs can no longer be met in their own home or in an assisted living environment. So while approximately half of residents who live in long-term care have a diagnosis of dementia that has progressed to the moderate or later stage, the other half include those with other complex care needs. Long-term care is monitored by the government licensing system under the Hospital Act, and it includes nursing care and supervision 24 hours a day, all meals, laundry, and now this includes linens and personal laundry, housekeeping, assistance with medication, assistance with activities of daily living. And these activities are those that are we do on a regular basis to manage our personal care. So that would be bathing, dressing, toileting, and grooming. And then finally, social and recreational activities such as exercise and music activities are also included. Let's take a look at the eligibility for subsidized care. For a person with dementia to be eligible for subsidized home care, assisted living, or long-term care services in BC, they must have lived in BC for at least 3 months, be a Canadian citizen, or have permanent resident status, and must be assessed as having health and functional needs that prevent them from living independently. Consent must also be obtained by the care home for admission. So this is the responsibility of the care home to obtain. However, you yourself can be proactive before the move and ask the care home, what do you need for consent? I'd like to ensure that consent is obtained before the move. Since each care home may have their own preferred process, you definitely want to check directly with them as to what that is. If the person living with dementia is unable to consent to the move themselves, then they will undergo an assessment of incapability, and a substitute decision maker, such as a family member, will be consulted to consent on their behalf. And this is where it can be very helpful to have a representation agreement, a Rep 9, in place to identify who should be the substitute decision maker. In the interest of time today, we won't dive into what this looks like, but you can review our recording of previous webinars on personal planning. Those are on our website, or you can call the First Link Dementia Helpline for more information. Another important factor when considering long-term care is obviously the cost. So you have the option of accessing long-term care through the publicly subsidized system or privately through independent operators. So for private care, you can expect to pay upwards of $6,000 to $10,000 per month. This will vary by care home and by the level of care that the person requires. Generally, as the level of care increases, so do the monthly costs. In subsidized care, the costs are offset by funding from the health authority. Under the current rate structure for long-term care, residents pay up to 80% of their after-tax income toward their housing and care costs. This will look different if both spouses are sharing a room, as the cost will be slightly lower per person since the costs are combined. However, just important to remember, and we want to be clear, that the monthly rate is calculated off the income of the person moving into care and not the couple's combined income if one spouse is remaining at home. So if you know that there is a possible transition to care coming up sometime in the next year, it is advisable to look at your taxable income and speak with a tax consultant or financial planner to ensure that you are financially prepared. So for 2021, the minimum monthly rate is for subsidized long-term care through the health authority is $1,204.90, and the maximum monthly rate is $3,448. And this rate is adjusted to ensure residents have at least $325 of income remaining each month after paying their monthly rate. Please note that these amounts are adjusted annually based on changes to the OAS, and so Old Age Security, and Guaranteed Income Supplement, and the Consumer Price Index. For more information on how this rate is calculated and for the most up-to-date information on calculating a monthly rate, you can visit, and we do encourage you to do that, the Ministry of Health's website on this topic, which is linked to our list of helpful resources at the end of this webinar. And you can also speak with your case manager for more information. There are additional expenses in addition to the monthly rate. And what is up on your screen now is not an exhaustive list, but just some examples of common expenses. And these include personal walkers or wheelchairs, medications that are not covered under pharmacare, telephone, internet, dental care, ID bracelets, special events or bus outings, hair care services, etc. And again, these expenses will vary by care home. Some care homes may include more than others in their monthly rate. For a comprehensive list of what is and is not covered, again, we recommend speaking with the care home directly. And an example of what might not be covered, so some styles of disposable underwear may include it, but others, such as pull-up style, which is typically preferred by the client, may cost extra. And also be mindful to not stock up on blister packs before a move. When you enter a care home, there's a new care team that will conduct a review of medication, and then this may result in a change to the person's medication regime. There are a number of benefits available to help with the costs of long-term care. I won't go into detail about them, but you can find more information at seniorsbc.ca or by calling Service BC at 1-800-663-7867, and that website and number is on your screen. If you are caring for a spouse or common law partner who will be transitioning into long-term care and they receive old age security and guaranteed income supplement, you may want to consider applying for involuntary separation if the spouse moving into care has the higher income. This is because the monthly rate for care is based on the person's after-tax income, which then may put the person not moving into care in a difficult financial situation. Also consider that if you did not qualify for old age security or guaranteed income supplement before filing for involuntary separation, you may qualify for these benefits after. To qualify for involuntary separation, the couple must be or will be living apart for reasons beyond their control, such as when one person moves into long-term care. You can apply for involuntary separation as soon as your case manager has agreed to a placement. And that's an important part to remember because it can take a while to get finalized. Please note that this may not be a beneficial option for everyone. Really want to highlight that and want to encourage you to speak with Service Canada and a financial planner if you have one. And they can help you to determine if this option makes sense for your individual financial situation. I also want to acknowledge that applying for involuntary separation can be difficult because of the term. It's important to remember that involuntary separation does not mean that you are ending your relationship or getting a legal separation or divorce. It only means that the spouses are considered as single individuals for the purpose of calculating their financial benefits. And again, for more information about the financial benefits or options available to you, please see our list of helpful resources for specific websites and contact information. Now we're going to shift to talking about how to access publicly subsidized long-term care. If you're planning to access private care, you can reach out to the care home directly. But if you're planning to access subsidized care, then your first step is an assessment by a health authority case manager to determine the person's eligibility and their need for long-term care. Some of the important factors they look at include the following. They'll look at the person's need for 24-hour nursing supervision or having a level of care need that cannot be adequately met within the person's home. They'll look if the person is at risk by remaining in their current living environment or are living to a degree of risk that cannot be managed by community services. So for example, if the person is living alone and does not have the cognitive ability to manage the care services that they need to remain at home. If the need to move into long-term care becomes urgent, so you may see this in situations where a person is living at home under the support of a caregiver, but then unfortunately the caregiver passes away and there's no one else available to provide the same level of care within the home. That becomes an urgent situation. And then on that note, the case manager also looks at the level of risk to the caregiver's well-being and their ability to safely provide the level of care required to keep the person at home. It can be hard to admit sometimes that what is being asked of you is too much or has become too much, but it is so important to let your case manager know if you're not doing well. You matter, your health is so important, your well-being matters. And in the long run, if you are not taking care of yourself, if you feel that you're not coping, that will impact your ability to care for the other person. The system for who gets priority for placement is based on assessment of who has the greatest care needs and or are at the highest level of risk if they remain in their current environment or current situation. So if there are multiple clients whose assessment of care needs and risk are the same, then health authorities also take into account the resources that are available to the person in the community, such as access to home support and home care, family and friend caregivers, and so on. This means that a person is placed on a wait list when it is determined by a case manager that they are eligible. You cannot have a person placed on a wait list until they display need for one of the above reasons. Even once the person is placed on a waiting list for care, it is still important to keep the case manager up to date on any changes in the situation, including changes to the person's care needs, the availability of care services, or if your own needs as the caregiver and your abilities have changed. Once that eligibility has been established, your case manager will ask you to identify up to 3 preferred care homes. Please note, you do not have to put 3 down. You can have just one facility on your list. Once you identify your choices, you are added to a wait list. You'll also be asked if you would consider an interim care home. So what this means is that if need of placement is more urgent or becomes more urgent, you can temporarily move into an interim home with the option to transfer to a preferred care home when a spot becomes available. You'll also have the option of your family members staying in the interim care home if they end up deciding, or you end up deciding, it's a really good fit for them and a transfer is no longer necessary. Keep in mind that some care homes do have longer wait lists than others. And if you're concerned about how long you might be waiting for a transfer to one of your preferred care homes, should you accept a bed in an interim care home, then you can ask your case manager for the average wait time for your preferred care home. And this may help you to make your decision. So So when a spot becomes available in one of your preferred care homes, you will have 48 hours to accept the offer and move in. If the offer is made for an interim care home, if you have agreed to consider this interim care home, then you have 72 hours. If you decline an offer of care for an interim care home, you remain on the wait list for your preferred care homes. If you decline an offer of care for a preferred care home, so for example, if your situation has changed and you no longer need the move to happen, or if moving the person in 48 hours is just not feasible at that time, then you will either remain on the wait list for another preferred care home if you have identified more than one, or you will be removed from the wait list. We really strongly advise you to confirm with your case manager what the process is if you decline an offer for a preferred care home, as this may definitely differ from health authority. And so I want to emphasize that very important point. If the person is transitioning into long-term care directly from hospital, then this process will look a bit different, and it will depend on what is available in your community at the time. In these instances, the transition to care may be coordinated by a social worker at the hospital or another member of the care team. If you have a case manager, then your case manager will work with you and the hospital to coordinate that transition from hospital into long-term care. One of the more common questions we get asked at the Society when people are looking into transitioning their person into care is a list of subsidized care homes in a local health authority. Because this information is subject to change, we always recommend that you get this list from a health authority case manager or your local health authority website. So the Ministry of Health's website offers a link to an interactive map where you can find care homes in your region and also access their inspection records by clicking on the map icons. You'll also find links to each health authority's website where you can click to see a list of all the care homes in a community, some information about that care home, and a list of their inspection records, such as examples you see on your screen now. So please note that the inspection records do not rank facilities or grade them in any way, and no one can recommend a specific facility that will meet your family members' needs best. What may be ideal to one person may not meet the needs of another. And our role at the Alzheimer's Society is to provide information about how to access long-term care and some things you might want to consider when choosing a care home, and to help provide information to ease the transition for you and the person you're caring for. For those of you that are interested in considering non-subsidized care homes, that is, privately run care homes, we recommend the ever useful Google. You could also consult the BC Care Providers website for private care options, and that link is included in the handout. Another excellent resource that includes both publicly subsidized and private care homes is Route 65. That's up on your screen now. This resource, which we have also included in the helpful resources document, is owned and operated by Engage BC, which is an operating arm of the BC Care Providers Association. And this allows you to search by type of care home, such as assisted living or long-term care, and in a specific community. There certainly are a lot of factors to consider when looking for long-term care, particularly if there are multiple options available in your community. Now, that may seem like a good problem to have, but often that leaves us feeling very overwhelmed as we really try our best to make the best choice. And so in the next couple of slides, we're going to discuss questions you can prepare to ask when considering a certain facility. So you may want to ask about dementia-specific units. Does that facility offer that? Ask about their activity programs. What kind of activities do they offer? How often do they offer that? What about spiritual support and spiritual programming? And then, does the home accommodate diverse cultural needs? These are things that may be really important to you in making your decision. Another good question is to ask about walking space inside the facility and outside. And then, of course, very importantly, is the food. Big important question. You can ask that. You can ask, what does the menu look like? And then, are options available? Another question might be, what languages are spoken in the care home? Visiting is one of the top questions that people do ask, and considering the situation that we have with COVID, that certainly is the burning question. So, how and where can family visit? Is there a kitchen or a lounge available? And then with the current COVID visitation situation, what is that specific facility's policy? I do just want to quickly stop here and make note of the fact that it's so important to realize, due to various reasons, that each facility may not have the same specific policy, and therefore it's very important to ask these questions, asking them what their policy is, and also when it will change, what has to happen in order to now all of a sudden maybe you were able to visit but now you can't. So those are definitely questions that you can freely ask when considering that specific facility. And then what about other services? So barber or a stylist, we all feel good when we get our hair done, and that certainly does not stop when you move into long-term care. Actually, it becomes even more important. And so, do they have one on site? And if not, do they have one that comes in a couple times a week or several times a month? And other services, physiotherapy, dental care, or foot care services. We have included links to 2 handouts in the helpful resource document that offers suggestions of questions that you may want to ask the care home. Do keep in mind, though, that not all these questions may be relevant or even important to the person moving into care. Some people need more access to quiet spaces as they get overwhelmed easily with background noise, and then others are less bothered by this. So here you're going to use the knowledge that you have of the person to determine what questions are most important to ask and what is most important to you for good care in their living arrangement. You may also want to consider the overall impression and feel for the care home. Sometimes the care home may have a negative reputation because the building is older or the appearance just may look unimpressive. However, the care staff may be incredible and the administration may be very communicative. So it is important to consider other factors that may be important to you when identifying your preferred care home. Does it appear clean and tidy without seeming institutional? And does it feel comfortable? So think about what your family member would notice. Will they notice the matching colors and matching furniture? Actually, sometimes mismatched furniture may look more familiar and homey to the person. Do the staff look organized and calm, and how do they interact with the residents around them? Do they appear to be engaging and interested, or busy and more distant? And then at meal times, this is a good thing to take note of. Are they talking over the residents' head, or are they talking directly to them? Now, obviously, these kinds of things would have been something you would have been able to see as you toured prior to COVID. when family members could visit the care home and assess for themselves what the residence is like. And so hopefully in the future, they'll go back to that system. But given current circumstances, it is good to know, though, that some places have virtual tours or they have a photo gallery available instead that you can access by calling the care home directly. You may also want to ask how the care home staff will keep in contact with you during the pandemic. And so that's an important aspect when you consider then how important the communication part is for you when you do have restrictions around visitation. And then a quick note about room sharing. In long-term care, residents will either have a private room or in some places they may share a room. A report from the BC Seniors Advocate in 2018 actually found that 87% of the rooms in long-term care are private. So really sharing a room is less common. However, I just want to note that aside from the infection control concerns that have been highlighted by COVID-19, some residents may actually feel comforted in a shared room depending on where they are at in their dementia and also their life history, what that has been. So for example, a person whose early years were spent sharing a room with siblings and then they moved to say a roommates in college and then moved to sharing a room with a spouse may actually feel alone and rather unsure in a private room. So it's again important to consider the person's unique needs and life history if you are offered a shared room. So far, we have covered options and cost for long-term care, how to access long-term care, and now we're going to move into the last part of our presentation, and we're going to discuss the big and often very emotionally challenging question: when is the right time to move into care? So this is certainly one of the common questions we get asked at the Society. The right time is very individual. Sometimes our preconceived notions of when the right time is will be quite different than the way it actually works out. For the person with dementia, this may be when safety issues like disorientation when walking outside, or the need for personal care increases, or there are behavior challenges that are beyond what can be managed safely in the home. For the caregiver, on the other hand, it may be when the caregiver's own health issues are escalating or they're burnt out and just there's no gas left in that tank. So most of us, we would say, have a line in the sand that we simply are not comfortable crossing, whether that be providing intimate personal care activities or moving in with the person to meet their escalating needs. There is no right answer to the question. To that question, when is the right time? There is no right answer. However, many people who have been there will say, you'll know. And keep in mind that the decision regarding a person's moving to care is a mutual one made between the caregiver and the person's case manager or primary care staff in the hospital. So this may mean that while you feel your family member is ready for care and you are ready for them to move into care, your case manager's assessment may be different. Now, absolutely, if you disagree with that assessment decision, we want to encourage you to speak with your case manager first before escalating your concerns. We've provided links to our advocacy handouts in the helpful resource document, and you're also encouraged to call the First Link Dementia Helpline if you have questions about next steps. I do want to note that with the COVID-19 pandemic, we are hearing from many families about the extraordinary measures that are being taken to support a person at home in order to delay a transition to care while these restrictions on visitation are still in place. Now, we don't know when exactly the restrictions will be lifted. There have been a little bit of easing up on some of them, but we're anticipating changes to restrictions coming over the next couple of months as many more people receive the vaccine. And this was shared as well by Dr. Bonnie Henry at a press briefing just a couple of weeks ago, March the 8th, I believe. So despite knowing that it really is the right time to move into care, this decision is still a very challenging one. So what makes this decision so challenging? Some people we have heard from have said that the decision is hard because they feel guilty. I'm sure many of you listening to this session can resonate with that. If this is the case for you, can you think about where that guilt might be coming from? So have you made commitments to the person in the past? Commitments such as, I promise I'll never move you into a care home. It can be hard to accept that the conditions in which you initially made this promise has changed. We once heard from a caregiver who had made that promise to her husband in the past that she wouldn't put him into care when he first got his diagnosis. When the day came, though, that this was no longer feasible for her, she sat him down, she held his hand, and she said, "My darling, you have outlived my promise." So if the person with dementia truly understood what would be required of you to meet this commitment, to meet this promise that you made, and the toll it would take, question to ask yourself is, do you think they would still want you to keep it? You may find the decision challenging because of the costs associated with care, as we spoke about earlier in the presentation. You may feel sadness that the person is at this point in their disease, or that you can no longer keep them at home. There's a lot of grief involved in making the decision to move into care. You may find it difficult to find the time, actually, to look into the different care homes or other options. And as much as you might know that you need help and that it's time to make this transition, you might feel as though you simply don't have time even to think about it. You're so focused and so consumed on taking care of just the next item on your to-do list that you can't even think about how you might feel about the move. And it's often just simply too overwhelming. You may also be worried that the transition to care will cause the person's health to decline or hasten their death. And this is particularly relevant to the current situation that we're facing with COVID-19. So all of the emotions and difficulties that are normally felt around the transition pre-COVID are just now absolutely intensified. And you're also trying to balance what the person wants with what they actually need. So yes, they want to stay in their home, but they need more care or more secure environment than can be provided at home. So that's really difficult. There may also, unfortunately, be a lack of family consensus. We do see this often. Family members having different ideas about if the person needs to move, where they should go, how that should look, how that should be arranged. And you may be feeling judgment from others who may not fully understand the situation, or who may have negative perceptions of care. For some cultures, there exists a great amount of stigma and expectations of care by their children in later life, which makes the decision particularly difficult. There's also the myth that moving a person into long-term care can amount to abandonment. But the reality of the situation is that you have done the very best that you can, and dementia requires so much more care than any one person can reasonably provide in the home. You've been asked to make a choice between two equally undesirable alternatives, and that often is what we hear from people saying that is why it's so challenging. And many caregivers are making this decision at a time when they're exhausted, when they're stressed, when they're worried, when they're grieving. So all these emotions get stirred up, and there's often this tug of war that goes between our emotions and our logic. So as we come to the end of our presentation, I just want to quickly touch on some helpful strategies others who have already gone through this process have found helpful in making the decision of moving someone into care. Ideally, the person living with dementia will be a part of this discussion. However, please note that admission to a care home does often occur in the late stages of dementia when insight, understanding, and judgment are often quite impaired. The move may not make sense to the person with dementia, or they may find the conversation that you're wanting to have with them quite overwhelming. And we're going to host a follow-up session to this one called Adjusting to Long-Term Care, where we will talk more about how you might communicate the move to the person living with dementia that will help them to adjust to the transition. For yourself, though, we strongly advise seeking support as you start to consider the transition to care. It can help to talk about the move with trusted family and friends who understand and support you, who also have some understanding around the dementia journey and the responsibilities of caregiving. We're actually currently offer 4 telephone support groups at the Society for Caregivers of a Person Living in Long-Term Care. And you may find it helpful to share your feelings about the move and hear the experience of others who have gone through the transition. Also, think about what support you might need to help you to prepare for the transition. So, for example, is there another family member who can help to coordinate virtual tours for you? Or is there someone that can help you with maybe labeling your family members' belongings? And again, we will talk about this in the Adjusting to Long-Term Care presentation. And then lastly, as we've already mentioned, ask lots of questions. Each care home will have its own systems, and the best way to learn them is to ask those questions. And again, please feel free to contact us at the First Link Dementia Helpline if you would like to discuss the transition more in depth. And then finally, the important thing to remember is that keep your case manager updated on any changes in your caregiving situation. As mentioned in the previous slide, we offer regular monthly telephone support groups for caregivers, 4 of which are specifically for caregivers of people living in long-term care. These particular groups have afternoon and evening options on various days. We also have more generalized region-specific groups. The important thing is that there is a safe space to share your experiences with others who can understand what it's like to walk the dementia journey. We often hear from those participating in these support groups that they are a lifeline for them. So if you are interested in learning more or registering for a support group, call our First Link Dementia Helpline at 1-800-936-6033. As we conclude this presentation, if you do have additional questions about information you've heard here or any other question about living with dementia, please don't hesitate to call our First Link Dementia Helpline. English services are available Monday to Friday between 9 a.m. and 8 p.m. And we also offer services in Cantonese or Mandarin and Punjabi. And finally, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today, for making the effort and for taking the time to learn more about dementia. Thank you so much.